After this, Jesus went to the other side of the Sea of Galilee, also called the Sea of Tiberias. A large crowd kept following him because they saw the signs that he was doing for the sick. Jesus went up the mountain and sat down there with his disciples. Now, the Passover, the festival of the Jews, was near. And when he looked up and saw a large crowd coming toward him, Jesus said to Philip, "Where are we to buy bread for these people to eat?" He said this to test him, because he himself knew what he was going to do. Philip answered him, "6 months' wages would not buy enough bread for each of them to get a little." One of his disciples, Andrew, Simon Peter's brother, said to him, "There is a boy who has 5 barley loaves and 2 fish. But what are they among so many people?" Jesus said, "Make the people sit down." Now, there was a great deal of grass in this place, so they sat down, about 5,000 in all. Then Jesus took the loaves, and when he had given thanks, he distributed them to those who were seated. So also the fish, as much as they wanted. And when they were satisfied, he told his disciples, "Gather up the fragments left over so that nothing may be lost." So they gathered them up. And from the fragments of 5 barley loaves left by those who had eaten, they filled 12 baskets. When the people saw the sign that he had done, they began to say, "This indeed is the prophet who has come into the world." And when Jesus realized that they were about to come and take him by force to make him king, he withdrew again to the mountain to be by himself. When they found him on the other side of the sea, they said to him, "Rabbi, when did you come here?" And Jesus answered them, "Very truly, I tell you, you are looking for me not because you saw signs, but because you ate your fill of loaves. Do not work for the food that perishes, but for the food that endures for eternal life, which the Son of Man will give you, for it is on him that God has set his seal." Jesus said to them, "I am the bread of life. Whoever comes to me will never be hungry. Whoever believes in me will never be thirsty." The Jews then disputed amongst themselves, saying, "How can this man give us flesh to eat?" So Jesus said to them, "Very truly, I tell you, unless you eat of the flesh of the Son of Man and drink his blood, you have no life in you. Those who eat my flesh and drink my blood have eternal life, and I will raise them up on the last day. For my flesh is true food, and my blood is true drink. Those who eat my flesh and drink my blood abide in me, and I in them. Just as the living Father sent me, and I live because of the Father, so whoever eats me will live because of me. This is the bread that came down from heaven, not like that which your ancestors ate, and they died. But the one who eats this bread will live forever."
Can you think of a time when you really, really needed something, or even just felt like you really needed something, and then received it? What was your first impulse to do with it? Imagine, for example, that you're desperately hungry and someone gives you a grocery bag full of food. Is your first impulse to look around and see who else you might share it with, or to clutch it tighter and find a place to hide? Today's story deals with exactly that question. A crowd of 5,000 approaches Jesus. They're hungry enough to eat up more than 6 months of wages, Philip figures. A boy offers 5 loaves and 2 fish. You know the next part? Everyone eats until they're satisfied, and there are still 12 baskets of leftovers. Then there's that next part that we maybe forget. Afterwards, the crowd tries to seize Jesus by force and to make him their king. Jesus escapes, but the crowd doesn't give up. They search all day and continue into the next one. Finally, they find Jesus on the other side of the sea. The search must have tired them out and cooled them off at least a little, because they're a little gentler this time, just asking, "Rabbi, when did you come here?" Jesus, as Jesus does, cuts to the chase. Pun intended this time, because instead of answering their question, Jesus says, "Look, forget about when I came here. Let's talk about why you've been chasing me. It's because you ate your fill of bread, isn't it? But if that's why you're chasing me, you've got it all wrong. You should be chasing after me because I am," there it is. Better pay attention. "I am," Jesus says, "the bread of life." Now, here's a curious thing about the Gospel of John. Twice now, on the Sunday, we commissioned our new leaders by talking about the beloved disciple. And last Sunday, as we talked about Jesus' announcement that he was going away, we looked at the part of John's Gospel where Jesus has his Last Supper with the disciples. But did you catch the curious thing about John's telling of that story either time? Did you catch that John doesn't include communion? John doesn't mention anything about Jesus breaking bread and saying, "This is my body." John doesn't say anything about Jesus pouring wine and saying, "This is my blood." Instead, he tells us about Jesus getting up from the table to wash feet in the middle of the meal. And now, if you can get over the gag reflex you might have about that timing, the communion omission begs some other questions, right? I won't get into all of them today. And we'll talk more about the foot washing later in Lent. But for now, let's just ask one of those questions that's raised. If John doesn't write about Jesus doing his communion thing at the Last Supper, does John say anything about communion? That'd be weird, right? Like, it's communion. For goodness sake, we've made it into a big thing in the church, and then not even all 4 of the Gospels bothered to mention it? Well, let's go back to today's story, 7 chapters earlier. 7 chapters earlier, where John says, after feeding 5,000 people, and they've chased him down because they want to make him their king, "I am the bread of life. Munch on me." And yes, I consulted 2 commentaries on this, and it still makes me giggle, but both commentaries say that the best translation of the word Jesus uses for eat here is munch. I mean, maybe we should put a billboard on Century Drive here, like, say, by that Cloud9 place, and say, "Got the munchies" in big felt, and then "for Jesus" in small letters, and then there could be an arrow pointing right here. You can take that into consideration. But my real point is that with Jesus grabbing our attention with not just the word eat, but particularly a really chewy word for eat, and then chasing it with a comment about his blood being a drink, it doesn't take a PhD in biblical studies to know that this is where John points to communion. Granted, the people who do have PhDs in biblical studies have all kinds of debate about the nuances, arguing, and I'm quoting some of them here, whether this passage is Eucharistic but not sacramental, or sacramental but not Eucharistic, or Eucharistic and sacramental. But to bring it all back to those people chasing Jesus, trying to make him king, my point for today is this. Jesus feeds the crowd. The crowd seizes Jesus to try to force him to be their king. They want to cling to Jesus so that he will keep them fed. They are, to go back to my opening question to you, they are the impulse within us to take a grocery bag of food when we're hungry and to pull it tightly to our chest and find a place to hide. To the crowd, Jesus is their ticket to increased security. And they are, we have to admit it, doing things in the ways we all too often do them. But after they seek Jesus out for most of the day and into the night and into the next day, they find out that God's ways are not our ways. They find Jesus who says, "You've got it all wrong. That wasn't my point. That's not what I'm doing here. My ultimate job is to share myself with you, to give all of myself to you, so that you might partake of me and my ways might become a part of your ways too, and that you might then have eternal, abundant, heavenly life as well." Which, remember, if we've been listening to what Jesus has been saying, isn't only about securing heaven, it's also about living into heaven on earth, where we can commune with one another generously. It's about receiving God's generosity now, a diet of sacred bread and wine that causes us to want to give more bread and more wine to others too. Friends, the hard news is that we all too often don't just want to cling to the bag of groceries when we're hungry. We want to cling to all of the bags and boxes of anything we can grab, even when we already have more than enough. It's understandable. The world is an even more frightening place right now than it was 2 weeks ago. But Jesus broke into this hurting and frightening world, saying, "I know you want to cling to me for security, and yes, I promise that you are safe with me forever, but more than that, I have come here so that you might see God's better ways. So that you might see, for example, that you can move from clinging to security to living generously." So, now, with all of that said, I want to invite you to the second part of today's message and introduce you to something we're going to be doing for Lent. Each Sunday, I'm going to share a little bit about the biblical text for the day and what it shows us about how God's ways contrast with our ways, like I've just tried to do now. And then I'm going to invite somebody else from the congregation up to share a confession about how that's been true for them. In part, I hope this practice will remind us that confession isn't something just big that only happens in churches that have a booth specializing for it, helpful as those can be, or something that we need to be scared of only associating with our deepest, darkest secrets, though I do hope you have some good friend in your life who you can share those with too. But instead, this Lent, I hope some of us will simply hear confessions about recognizing some of the limitations of the ways we tend to live and how we've sought or are currently seeking God's ways in response. We'll do this in part because these stories are a great application of each day's sermons, but in doing this, I also hope we'll see confession can simply be us being honest about how God has worked in our life and is still working in our life, how sometimes we're feeling reoriented in life. So, to kick this off, I'd like to invite June Forsyth-Kanegi up for a little interview about how she's working on being generous in a very particular setting, after feeling she had come to realize that she had some work to do. You can grab that mic right there. June, yeah, you can come stand with this mic here. Yeah. All right. Hi, June.
Hi.
Hi. So a few weeks ago already, you shared a picture with me that depicted some of your unique upbringing, right?
Yeah.
Can we put that up?
Okay.
And then this week you shared some more too.
Yeah. That's my dad in the middle with his deer on his head. And he used to hunt deer out of season so we could have something to eat. We were quite poor. And
Yeah. I showed two more here. And along the way, do you mind telling us a little bit about your upbringing and maybe even giving us an anecdote that kind of captures what it was like for you?
okay. That was my bedroom, that black car that you see there. My dad took the seats out and sewed a seat and a half together and made a bed along the side. And I could lock the doors because we had a shell-shocked neighbor down the street, and he would come up sometimes. So, and I made curtains, and it was my little room because my dad was a chain smoker, and he smoked in our little you can kind of see the trailer there. It was about 15 feet long. It's a travel trailer. We always parked about 5 miles from the nearest neighbor. No, we never had visitors, so I never learned how to be sociable. So I'm not good at that. And this is hard to do.
Well, you're doing great.
Yeah, I'm an introvert.
Thanks for launching us on our confessions as an introvert.
Okay.
What did you love about your upbringing, though?
Well, I remember one time when we were traveling across the country from Long Island to Oregon, that my mother sat in the trailer with us. We had stopped for some reason and played a game with my brother and me. And that's the only time I ever remember playing a game with my mother, but that was a good memory.
Yeah. You've mentioned some of it, I've alluded to some of it, but what do you feel like, what are some of the limitations you feel like have come with your upbringing?
The limitations?
Yeah, that you mentioned to me last week.
Well, like I say, we didn't have visitors, so I never learned how to greet people, and I didn't know that families, when they got together, they hugged one another. Never did that. So anyway, there's just a lot of social skills that I don't have because I never learned, and I'm not good on the telephone.
Oh.
Partly because it can't hear, and partly because we didn't have a telephone, so I never learned to talk on the telephone a lot.
Yeah. A couple weeks ago, you shared to me about like kind of how this impacts you in a very specific place, in the grocery store you've been thinking about, right? Do you want to share a little bit how this influences you in the grocery store?
Yeah, I have a tendency, especially since COVID, to want to get in and out of the grocery store as quick as I can, get out where I don't have to wear a mask and there aren't people that can give me COVID. And so I'm always in a hurry. And I realized about 2 weeks ago, maybe 3 weeks ago, that I'm looking at the grocery store as an obstacle course. And I just zig and zag and go in between people and get to what it is I want as fast as I can. And I don't look at it as a place to meet people. And, all of the people in the grocery store have their own sad stories. And they have their pain, they have their joy, but they have their pain. And I need to try to somehow come out of my shell here and reach out to people.
Thanks, June. Are you willing to share an example of something that happened in the grocery store once that didn't feel like it went well, or how you'd want it to go?
Right now I can't think of
That's
anything,
fine.
but I'm scared.
That's fine. We won't make you go that far into your confession. So let's move to the good part. How are you moving from prioritizing security to working for generosity in the grocery store? What are you challenging yourself with?
Well, I pray about it, and I'm trying to see people, and not to see them as obstacles, but to see them as people. And it's not going very well, but I'm working on it. And
Yeah, I appreciate how you shared with me that this is very much a work in progress. I feel like you're at the
very
beginning.
much a work in progress.
Yeah, that's great. Is there something specific we can pray for you as you work on this element of your generosity?
Please.
Is there anything in particular we can pray for?
I'm sort of freezing up here.
Oh, that's okay. We will pray for you I think we can know what to pray.
Okay.
All right. Well, thank you for your confession this morning, June.
Did you want to do that?
Yeah, would you be willing to lead us in our congregation, our collective reading of confession this morning?
Yeah, it's in the bulletin.
Yeah, and I
No,
think
it's
we'll
up
put it
there.
up here too. Yeah.
It's up
It's
there.
in both. It's both. There we go.
Okay. Holy One, we seek you while you may be found.
We call upon you while you are near.
Have mercy on us, O God, for our thoughts are not your thoughts, and our ways are not your ways.
Forgive us for seeking security. Lead us into your way of generosity.
As we walk with Jesus on this Lenten journey, let us see your way more clearly. Oh, your way more faithfully.